The kitten lay motionless, its tiny body barely rising with each shallow breath, and the boy's heart pounded in his chest. He had done everything he could, kept it warm, fed it, whispered soothing words, but now, it seemed like all his efforts might be in vain. He stared at the fragile creature, tears welling in his eyes, unable to understand why it wasn't responding. The kitten had once mewed for attention, but now it seemed so far away, its chest rising and falling ever more faintly. He whispered its name, his voice trembling, but it didn't stir. Panic clawed at him. What if it was too late? What if all the help, all the care, wasn't enough? The world outside felt distant, as if it had forgotten to care, leaving him alone with his helplessness and the tiny, still form of the kitten. Chapter 1. The Encounter with Misfortune. Maxim had always been curious about the old, abandoned building that stood on the edge of his neighborhood. It had been there for as long as he could remember, its windows boarded up, its crumbling walls telling stories of neglect. He'd often wondered what was inside, but his parents always told him to stay away from places like that, warning him about the danger. Today, however, on his way home from school, something felt different. The air was cooler, and a light breeze tugged at his jacket, as if it was urging him to take a detour. He found himself standing in front of the building, staring at the rusted metal door. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. He glanced around, checking to make sure no one was watching, and then, driven by curiosity, he pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, making him jump. Maxim hesitated for a moment, his heart racing with excitement and fear, but something deep inside him urged him to go further. He stepped cautiously inside, the musty smell of damp wood and decaying bricks filling the air. The sunlight barely filtered through the cracks in the walls, leaving the place in an eerie half-darkness. He moved quietly through the dim space, his sneakers barely making a sound on the dusty floor. As he explored, he noticed piles of old furniture, broken bricks, and scattered bits of debris. But then, something caught his attention. A faint, high-pitched noise. It sounded like a soft squeak, almost like a cry for help. Maxim stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes scanning the room for the source of the sound. It was coming from behind a pile of construction debris, where a heap of broken wood and twisted metal lay. Maxim felt a surge of urgency. Without thinking, he rushed over to the pile and crouched down. As he peered into the mess, he saw something small, fragile, and trembling. It was a kitten, its tiny body wedged into a small gap between the rubble. The poor thing was stuck, unable to move, and its fur was covered in dust and dirt. It let out a faint mewl, its eyes wide with fear. Maxim's heart lurched at the sight. He had always loved animals, and the thought of this helpless kitten trapped like this stirred something deep inside him. He couldn't just leave it there. Maxim quickly looked around, trying to figure out how to help. He knew the building was unsafe, and trying to move the debris by himself seemed like a dangerous task. He wasn't strong enough to lift the heavy pieces of wood and metal, but he couldn't just leave the kitten there to suffer. He took a deep breath and began pulling at the lighter pieces of rubble, hoping to make enough space to get to the animal. But every time he moved something, the kitten would cry out in distress, its little paws scraping the ground as it tried to wriggle free. Maxim's hands were shaking as he continued to carefully push away the debris. He tried to be as gentle as possible, knowing that one wrong move could hurt the fragile creature. The kitten seemed so small and fragile, its tiny body barely moving as it huddled in place. Maxim felt a knot in his stomach. He was terrified that he might accidentally hurt it while trying to help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maxim managed to clear enough space to reach the kitten. He carefully placed his hands under its tiny body, lifting it slowly. The kitten squirmed a little, but it didn't fight him. Its soft fur was covered in dirt, and it looked exhausted and scared. Maxim could feel its tiny heart beating fast in his hands as he gently cradled it against his chest. But even as he held the kitten, Maxim's mind was racing. How was he going to get it home? He couldn't just leave it here, but he also didn't have any way to take care of it properly. He didn't know what to do next. He glanced down at the kitten, who was still shaking in his arms, and his stomach tightened with worry. He could feel a surge of protectiveness for the tiny creature, But he knew he couldn't do this alone. He had to act fast. Maxim looked around the room again, searching for anything that could help. He spotted an old cloth, a torn piece of fabric on the floor, and quickly grabbed it. He wrapped the kitten in the cloth as best as he could, trying to shield it from the dirt and debris. It seemed to settle a little, its tiny body trembling against his chest. But then, just as Maxim was about to turn and leave the building, something unexpected happened. As he lifted the kitten, the fragile little creature suddenly jerked its tiny paw. Maxim froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was as if the kitten was trying to move on its own, but it couldn't. The paw twitched again, and Maxim felt a pang of fear in his chest. What if something was broken? What if the kitten was hurt worse than he thought? His breath caught in his throat as he carefully adjusted his hold on the kitten, his hands trembling with the weight of the situation. The kitten didn't move again, and Maxim wasn't sure whether to be relieved or more worried. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it too late to save it? Had the little creature suffered too much? Was he strong enough to help it heal? The kitten's tiny body felt so fragile in his hands, and Maxim couldn't help but wonder if he was doing more harm than good. His hands clenched the cloth tighter, holding the kitten close to his chest, as if he could somehow transfer all of his strength to the helpless little animal. But there was no turning back now. He had made a promise to himself and to the kitten. He was going to do whatever it took to help it, no matter how hard it might be. And even though he was terrified, Maxim knew he couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything he had already done to save it. He glanced at the kitten again, and for a moment, he thought he saw its eyes flicker open, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Chapter 2. The Kitten's Rescue. Maxim walked quickly down the street, clutching the small kitten wrapped in his sweater. His heart was pounding, and his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. He couldn't just leave the kitten where he had found it, trapped and alone. It seemed so fragile, so helpless. He had promised himself he would help it, but now that he was faced with the reality of it all, he wasn't sure what to do next. The trip back to his house felt longer than usual, every step heavy with the responsibility he had taken on. His parents were strict about the animals they allowed inside, and he knew they wouldn't approve of him bringing a stray kitten home. But Maxim couldn't bear the thought of leaving it behind. The kitten was depending on him. When he reached his house, he paused for a moment, looking at the front door. He had to come up with a plan. The kitten was shivering in his arms, its tiny body trembling despite the warmth of his sweater. It needed warmth, and it needed care. He couldn't just leave it in the cold. He had to think fast. Maxim went around to the back of the house and slipped into the basement through the side door. It was a little cooler in the basement, but at least it was a quiet, private place where he could figure out what to do. He had to keep the kitten safe until he could come up with a better solution. He didn't know what his parents would say, but for now, the kitten needed him more than anything else. Inside the basement, Maxim set the kitten gently on a pile of old blankets. The space was cluttered with boxes and forgotten things, but it was a warm enough place for now. He knelt down beside the kitten, taking a deep breath as he assessed its condition. The little creature was still shivering, its small body covered in dirt. It looked so vulnerable, and Maxim felt a pang of guilt. Had he made the right decision? What if the kitten didn't survive? What if it was too late to help? He quickly ran upstairs to the kitchen and grabbed a couple of old towels. He needed to warm the kitten up before it got sick. When he returned to the basement, he wrapped the kitten in the towels, trying to keep it as comfortable as possible. He could feel the little body trembling against his hands, and it made his heart ache. The kitten's tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, as though it was struggling to breathe. Maxim gently stroked its fur, murmuring soft words to comfort it, though he wasn't sure if the kitten could understand. As he sat there, waiting for the kitten to settle, he began to think of the next steps. He couldn't just keep it hidden in the basement forever. He would have to figure out how to take care of it properly, find out what it needed to get better. But how would he manage? He was just a 10-year-old boy. What did he know about taking care of a kitten? He had never done anything like this before. Maxim's thoughts were interrupted by a small, soft sneeze. The kitten had begun to shake again, its tiny nose twitching as it let out a weak, almost pitiful sound. Maxim's heart sank as he realized that the kitten was sick. It was probably cold, and it might have more serious injuries than he'd first thought. The sneeze was followed by another, and then the kitten began to cough lightly. Maxim's stomach twisted with worry. What if it had caught something while being trapped under the rubble? He knew he had to act fast. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Maxim glanced around the basement, searching for something he could use. There were some old boxes stacked in the corner, and he grabbed one, rifling through it to find something that might help. He pulled out an old heating pad he had once used when he was sick, plugged it in, and placed it under the blankets where the kitten lay. The warmth was comforting, and the kitten seemed to relax a little. Maxim knew it wasn't enough though. He had to get the kitten to a vet as soon as possible. But he didn't know how to get help. He didn't have a phone, and he couldn't just walk into the nearest animal clinic. His parents would never allow him to take the kitten out of the house, especially if they found out he had brought it home without asking. Maxim frowned, feeling the weight of his decision. But he also knew he couldn't just leave the kitten like this. He had to do everything in his power to save it, even if it meant finding a way around his parents' rules. As the minutes passed, Maxim's anxiety grew. The kitten's sneezing had only become more frequent, and its little body shivered uncontrollably. Maxim could feel his own fear rising. What if it was too late? What if the kitten couldn't survive? He couldn't bear the thought of losing it after everything he had done to help. Suddenly, the kitten let out another sneeze, and its body jerked slightly as it coughed. Maxim's eyes widened. The coughing seemed to be getting worse, and it was making the kitten even weaker. He could see its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly, and a small tear rolled down Maxim's cheek. He wasn't sure if the kitten was going to make it. But he couldn't give up now. He couldn't let it down. He had made a promise to the kitten when he first found it, a promise that he would do whatever it took to help. And now, despite the fear swirling in his chest, Maxim knew he had to keep that promise. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't turn back. He had to get the kitten the help it needed, no matter what. Chapter 3. The First Care. Maxim spent the entire afternoon in the basement, making sure the kitten was as comfortable as possible. He had gathered a few old blankets and pieces of fabric from his room to make a small nest in the corner of the basement, away from the cold concrete floor. He carefully placed the kitten in the little makeshift bed and covered it gently with the cloth. His hands shook as he worked, afraid that the kitten might be in too much pain to survive. The small, fragile creature needed him, and Maxim didn't want to let it down. After settling the kitten, Maxim went upstairs to find something he could use to feed it. He found a small bottle of milk in the fridge, but when he tried to offer it to the kitten, it didn't respond. He gently held the bottle to the kitten's mouth, but the little creature wouldn't drink. Its eyes were closed, and its breathing was shallow. Maxim felt a pang of worry and helplessness. What if the kitten couldn't survive? What if he was doing everything wrong? Determined, Maxim sat down next to the kitten, his eyes never leaving its tiny form. He tried again to get the kitten to drink, but it still refused. Frustration built up inside him, but he couldn't give up. He needed to figure out what was wrong. He pulled out his phone and began searching the internet for advice on how to care for a sick kitten. The more he read, the more overwhelmed he felt. There were so many things to keep in mind: feeding schedules, temperature control, and keeping the kitten hydrated. It seemed like a lot for him to handle alone. As Maxim scrolled through article after article, he came across several suggestions for feeding kittens in poor health, but none of them felt like a perfect solution. He had tried using a syringe to feed the kitten, but that wasn't working either. Maybe it needed a specific kind of milk. Maybe it was just too weak to eat. Maxim sighed, feeling exhausted. His mind was spinning with questions. How was he supposed to know what was right for the kitten? What if he was doing more harm than good? But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't give up now. He couldn't let the kitten down after everything it had been through. So, he kept reading, trying to piece together enough knowledge to care for it properly. Every time he thought he had found the right advice, another question would arise. The more he learned, the more he realized how much he still didn't know. But Maxim was determined. He wasn't going to let the kitten suffer if he could help it. After hours of searching, he finally found a suggestion that seemed promising. It said that sick kittens often needed warmth to help them eat and recover. Maxim remembered the heating pad he had used earlier to keep the kitten warm and quickly placed it under the little creature. The warmth would hopefully help it relax and encourage it to drink. He stayed by the kitten's side, watching its every movement. Time seemed to drag on as he waited for a sign that the kitten was getting better. Maxim's hopes were dashed when he saw no improvement, but he refused to lose hope. He could hear the kitten's faint breaths, and the gentle rise and fall of its chest gave him a glimmer of optimism. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the kitten made a tiny movement. Maxim's eyes widened, his heart racing. The kitten's head turned slightly, and for a brief moment, it opened its eyes. Maxim held his breath as he watched the small creature slowly raise one paw. It was the first sign of life he had seen in hours. And then, as if answering Maxim's silent prayers, the kitten let out a weak, soft meow. It was almost too quiet to hear, but Maxim caught it. The sound was so faint, but it was a sound that made him smile with relief. The kitten was still weak, but it was alive. And that was enough for now. Maxim gently reached out and stroked the kitten's fur, his heart swelling with relief and joy. The kitten had responded, even if only for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And that was all Maxim needed to feel like he hadn't failed. With renewed determination, Maxim promised himself that he would do whatever it took to help the kitten get better. He didn't know how long it would take or what challenges lay ahead, but he was willing to fight for the kitten's recovery. He would keep learning, keep trying, and keep caring for it. The kitten had a chance, and Maxim wasn't going to waste it. Just as he was about to settle down beside the kitten again, he heard a faint noise, a soft scratching sound coming from the corner of the basement. Maxim turned his head, startled. The noise wasn't from the kitten. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving in the shadows. Maxim's heart skipped a beat. What was it? Chapter 4. Parents Against It. Maxim stood at the kitchen table, nervously twisting the corner of a napkin in his hands. His heart was pounding as he waited for the right moment to tell his parents about the kitten. He had spent days trying to care for the small, fragile creature, and it was starting to get better. But he knew this was just the beginning of a bigger challenge. How would his parents react? After a long day of school, Maxim had finally worked up the courage to tell them. They were in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he walked in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, Dad, I found a kitten." His parents paused their movements, both turning to look at him with expressions that ranged from confused to concerned. "A kitten," his dad repeated, eyebrows raised. "Maxim, where did you find it?" Maxim explained everything. The abandoned building, the broken-down pit, the desperate little creature trapped under the debris. He told them how he couldn't leave it there, how he brought it home, how he had tried his best to take care of it. His mom frowned, and Maxim could feel her disappointment settling in the room. "Maxim, you can't just bring home every animal you find," she said sternly. "You don't even know how to properly care for a sick kitten. It's better off at a shelter where they can help." Maxim's stomach sank. He had anticipated this reaction but hadn't fully prepared for how it would feel to hear his parents dismiss his efforts so easily. He could see the concern in their eyes, but it wasn't for the kitten, it was for him. They worried that he didn't understand the responsibility he was taking on. But Maxim wasn't going to give up without a fight. "Please, Mom, Dad," he pleaded, his voice shaking slightly. "I've been reading everything I can. I'm taking care of it. I'll make sure it's okay. Please, let me keep it." His parents exchanged looks, still unsure. His mom sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Maxim, this isn't just about taking care of the kitten. It's about making sure it's the right thing to do. Do you really think you can handle all of this on your own?" Maxim's heart raced, but he stood his ground. I'll do everything. I promise. I won't let it suffer. I'll make sure it gets better. Please, just give me a chance. His dad stood there for a moment, arms crossed, deep in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice softening. Okay, Maxim, he said slowly. We'll give you a chance. But if the kitten doesn't improve, you'll have to take it to the shelter. Understood. Maxim's face lit up with relief. I promise it will get better. His mom nodded reluctantly. But we're holding you to that promise. If it gets worse, you're responsible. Maxim nodded eagerly, a surge of hope flooding through him. He had done it. He had convinced them to give him a chance. But there was still one more thing. The kitten had to get better. Days passed, and Maxim watched the kitten carefully, noting its progress. Slowly but surely, it began to regain some strength. It started to move around a bit more, its little legs no longer trembling with weakness. The soft meows it made grew louder and more frequent. Maxim couldn't help but smile as the kitten showed more and more signs of life. But just when things seemed to be looking up, something changed. One morning, Maxim went downstairs to check on the kitten, only to find it laying on its side, not moving. Its breathing was shallow, and its eyes were closed. Panic surged through Maxim. He rushed over to the kitten, gently nudging it with his hand. Hey, are you okay? He whispered desperately. The kitten didn't respond. Maxim's heart raced as he picked it up carefully, his hands shaking. No, 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 he muttered under his breath. Please, don't let this happen now. The kitten's body was warm, but it wasn't moving. Maxim's mind raced with all the things that could have gone wrong. Had it been too cold again? Was the milk not enough? What had he missed? He looked at the kitten, then quickly turned to run upstairs, hoping to get his parents' help. But the moment he reached the door, he heard a faint sound. The kitten mewed softly, its tiny body wriggling in Maxim's hands. Maxim froze. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reassure him. The kitten was still fighting. But it also meant there was something wrong. With a deep breath, Maxim gently set the kitten down on its bed, covering it with the warmth of a blanket. He knew he couldn't lose hope now, not when the kitten had come so far. But as he watched the kitten, his worries grew. He couldn't ignore the signs. It wasn't out of danger yet. What was going on? What else could he do? Maxim glanced at the door, the quiet house suddenly feeling so much larger. The world outside seemed to carry on without a care, but Maxim's world had shrunk to this small, fragile creature in front of him. He had made a promise, and now, more than ever, he had to make sure it was a promise he could keep. Intrigue, as Maxim stands there, deep in thought, a soft sound breaks the silence. Could the kitten be trying to tell him something, or was there another danger waiting? Chapter 5. Treatment and Care. Maxim stood by the front door, nervously clutching the kitten wrapped in a soft towel. The small creature was still weak, its little body trembling despite the warmth of the towel. Maxim had made the decision. It was time to take the kitten to the vet. He knew he couldn't afford to wait any longer. The kitten had been through so much, and Maxim had tried everything he could on his own, but he needed professional help. The thought of hearing that the kitten might not survive, or that he had missed something important, made his stomach turn, but he pushed the fear aside. This was the only chance to find out what was really wrong. With his mom's help, they managed to take the kitten to the nearest veterinary clinic. The bright white walls and the smell of antiseptic filled the air, and Maxim felt a little out of place, like he didn't belong in this world of needles and diagnoses. But the vet was kind and professional, taking the kitten from Maxim's arms and gently placing it on the examination table. As the vet examined the small body, she made notes, and Maxim watched her every move closely. When she finally looked up, she gave him a reassuring smile, though there was concern in her eyes. Your kitten has a mild cold, but it's not too serious, she said. It's actually lucky you brought it in when you did. However, there are signs that it's also suffering from some trauma, likely from the fall it took. You did well keeping it warm, but it still needs more care to recover from that. Maxim's heart sank. He had hoped it was just a simple cold. The idea that the kitten had more injuries made him feel guilty, as if he had somehow failed it. But the vet's kind words gave him hope. "So, what should I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll start with some medication and vitamins to boost its immune system and help it fight off the cold. But it will need time to heal, both physically and emotionally. You'll have to be patient with it, especially with the trauma it's been through." Maxim nodded, relieved that there was a plan. He took the prescribed medications and vitamins from the vet and promised to follow the instructions carefully. On the way home, his mind raced with all the things he needed to do to make sure the kitten had the best chance of recovery. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. Back at home, Maxim set up a cozy little space for the kitten in his room, complete with a warm blanket and a soft bed. He started giving it the medicine as directed, watching carefully for any signs that it might be getting better. The kitten didn't seem to mind the pills as much as Maxim had expected, and it even drank the special vitamin mixture, though slowly and with reluctance. But despite his best efforts, the kitten still looked exhausted. It had stopped sneezing so much, but it wasn't exactly getting any more active. Maxim sat by its side, watching as the tiny creature curled up into a ball, its eyes half closed. Over the next few days, he continued to administer the medicine, but every time he thought the kitten was making progress, it would regress. The kitten's fear of people was still very strong. It would flinch if Maxim moved too quickly or tried to pet it. Maxim knew that the kitten's ordeal had left it with more than just physical scars. It was terrified of human touch, and Maxim understood that it would take time to gain its trust. Every day, he tried to be patient. He would sit quietly next to the kitten, talking to it in soothing tones, hoping that it would grow accustomed to his presence. He couldn't bear the thought of the kitten being afraid of him, but he knew it wasn't something he could rush. Then, one day, as Maxim was giving the kitten its medication, he noticed something odd. The kitten seemed to be getting worse instead of better. Its breathing was shallow, and it lay still, not even flinching when Maxim picked it up. He had been so sure that the medicine would help, that the vet's advice would be the turning point. But now, he was worried that it wasn't enough. Was the trauma from the fall more severe than the vet had realized? Maxim's heart pounded in his chest as he placed the kitten back into its bed, his mind racing with questions. Had he done something wrong? What if the kitten needed more help than he could give? The kitten's eyes were half-lidded, and it didn't respond when Maxim whispered its name. The fear started to rise again in Maxim's chest. He had promised that he would take care of this kitten, but now, he was feeling like he might fail. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the small creature that had already come so far with his help. Intrigue. Just as Maxim began to lose hope, he saw a tiny flicker in the kitten's eyes. Was it a sign that it was still fighting? Or was it too late for the kitten to recover? Maxim felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him, unsure of what to do next. Chapter 6. Growing Trust. Maxim had been taking care of the kitten for weeks now, and every day he saw small signs that it was getting better. The kitten was still very cautious, but now it allowed Maxim to gently stroke its soft fur. At first, any sudden movement would make it flinch, but over time, the little creature had started to trust him more and more. Maxim was careful to move slowly around it, speaking in quiet, soothing tones so that the kitten wouldn't feel threatened. The bond between them was growing. The kitten, once weak and afraid, was slowly but surely getting stronger. Its once fragile form was now beginning to fill out, its movements less jerky and more deliberate. Maxim watched in awe as the kitten, which had barely moved when he first found it, began to bat at the soft toys he had placed nearby. It wasn't much, but it was progress, and Maxim couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Every playful swat at the toy was a sign that the kitten was returning to life. Maxim knew that the kitten wasn't fully recovered yet, but it was amazing to see the transformation. The creature that had once been helpless and vulnerable was now exploring, moving around more confidently, and even beginning to show its playful side. Maxim knew he had a long way to go in caring for it, but seeing it act like a kitten again filled him with hope. One quiet afternoon, as Maxim sat on the floor in his room, the kitten jumped up onto his lap and curled up, purring contentedly. Maxim's heart swelled with joy. He'd done this. He'd saved this little life, and now the kitten was showing him affection, trusting him completely. It was a moment that made all the late nights, the worries, and the effort worthwhile. But now, Maxim faced a new challenge. He had to come up with a name for the kitten. He had been calling it Kitten for so long, but it didn't feel right. It deserved a proper name, something special. Maxim sat down with the kitten, trying out different names, calling them softly and seeing how the kitten reacted. Milo, Max, Whiskers. None of them felt quite right. The kitten looked up at him with curious eyes but didn't seem to respond to any of the names he tried. Maxim thought about it for a while, then a memory came to him. The rainy afternoon when he had found the kitten, alone and shivering under a pile of debris. He smiled softly, thinking how the kitten had been so helpless, and how he had been there to help it. That's when the perfect name came to him. Rain. It was simple, but it felt right. The kitten had been found in the rain, and now it was safe and warm, growing stronger by the day. As he called the kitten Rain for the first time, the little creature perked up and tilted its head, as if it was listening closely. Maxim chuckled softly. Rain, huh? I think it suits you. He stroked its fur again, feeling proud and content. This was his kitten now. It wasn't just an animal he had rescued. It was a friend, a companion, and a source of comfort. Days passed, and Maxim continued to care for Rain, feeding him, cleaning him, and playing with him. The kitten was becoming more playful, jumping and chasing after anything that moved. Maxim knew there was still work to be done, but the growth in Rain's trust was evident. The kitten would come to him willingly, curl up in his lap, and fall asleep in his arms without flinching. Each moment like this made Maxim feel a deeper connection to the small creature. Despite the progress, there were still times when Rain would startle at sudden noises or movements, but that was to be expected. Maxim was patient, taking care to reassure the kitten with soft words and slow, deliberate motions. The trust was growing, and Maxim could see that Rain was becoming more and more comfortable in his presence. One evening, after school, Maxim rushed home, eager to see how Rain was doing. He had a few new toys to try with the kitten, and he couldn't wait to spend time with him. But as he opened the door and entered his room, he froze. Rain wasn't in his usual spot, curled up on the bed. The little creature wasn't anywhere in sight. Intrigue. Maxim's heart raced as he searched the room, his thoughts spiraling. Where could Rain be? Had something happened to him? Had he wandered off? Anxiety gripped Maxim's chest, and he couldn't help but worry. But just as he was about to call out for Rain, he heard a faint noise from behind the curtain. He turned toward it, his breath catching in his throat. What was Rain doing there? Chapter 7. A new step in treatment. Maxim had been taking care of the kitten for several weeks now, and although it had made tremendous progress, there were still occasional signs that it wasn't entirely out of the woods. The little creature was stronger, moving around more freely, and playing with the few toys Maxim had managed to gather for it. But there were still those moments when the kitten seemed to falter. A sudden bout of sneezing, a brief lack of appetite, or a weak, tired look in its eyes. Maxim knew that it wasn't fully recovered yet. He had learned quickly that healing, especially after something as traumatic as the kitten had gone through, wasn't always linear. It was during one of these moments, when the kitten suddenly stopped eating its food and refused to play, that Maxim felt a pang of worry shoot through him. He had done everything he could, followed every instruction the vet had given him, but now the kitten's health seemed to take a small step back. Was something wrong again? Was it getting worse? Maxim knew that he couldn't afford to take chances. After all the time and effort he had put into nursing the kitten back to health, he couldn't allow it to slip away now. He decided to take the kitten back to the vet, just to be sure. It was a tough decision. The vet visits always felt like a reminder of how fragile the kitten was, and Maxim hated seeing the creature in such a vulnerable state. But he needed to know. The next morning, Maxim carefully bundled the kitten up in an old towel to keep it warm and placed it gently in a small carrier. He felt the weight of the kitten's fragile body as he walked to the clinic, his heart heavy with concern. The kitten, who had grown so accustomed to his gentle touch, seemed to have lost some of its energy, curling up tightly in the corner of the carrier, barely moving. Maxim kept his hand resting on the side of the crate, reassuring himself that the little one was still there, still fighting. At the vet's office, Maxim was anxious, waiting for the veterinarian to give him answers. When the vet finally examined the kitten, she gently prodded the tiny body, checking for any signs of lingering injuries or new complications. She nodded and took a deep breath. The kitten's recovery is going well overall, but we are still seeing some signs of weakness, likely due to the trauma it suffered earlier, the vet explained. It's not uncommon for animals that have been through such an ordeal to experience some setbacks during recovery. We'll need to adjust the treatment a bit. The vet's words reassured Maxim, but he was still uneasy. The vet suggested adding some extra vitamins and adjusting the medication to help the kitten's immune system. We'll also need to monitor it for any signs of infection or complications, especially from the injury. The stress from the fall could have slowed its overall recovery, she said, her voice calm but firm. Maxim listened intently, absorbing the information as best he could. He was doing his best to keep the kitten comfortable, but now he had to step it up. He thanked the vet and made a mental note of all the instructions she had given him. He promised to follow through on everything, no matter how hard it might get. On the walk home, Maxim was determined. He knew the kitten wasn't out of the woods yet, but he had to remain positive. He would make sure to follow the new instructions carefully. The changes in treatment didn't sound too difficult, just more careful attention and extra medication. The hard part was going to be making sure the kitten remained calm during the process. It was still scared of the pills, the syringes, and everything that came with the treatment. That evening, Maxim spent extra time preparing the kitten's next dose of medicine. He had learned over the past few weeks how to give it its meds, but the kitten still struggled. It mewed in distress as Maxim gently tried to open its tiny mouth to give it the pills. At first, the kitten squirmed, trying to break free from Maxim's hold, but Maxim had learned to be patient. He tried to comfort the kitten, speaking in a soft voice, soothing it as he carefully administered the medicine. The process was slow, but Maxim kept his cool. He had learned to be patient with the kitten, to take his time and not rush things. It seemed to be working. The kitten's anxiety was starting to ease, and it didn't resist as much. Maxim was proud of how far they had come together. After the medicine, Maxim decided it was time for the kitten to get some playtime. He retrieved the few toys he had for it, a small ball of yarn and a little stuffed mouse. At first, the kitten just stared at them, its big eyes wide and unsure, but soon it was batting at the yarn, its little paws moving quicker and more confidently. Maxim couldn't help but smile at the sight. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The kitten was beginning to feel better, to enjoy itself again. Maxim sat on the floor next to the kitten, watching it play. He felt a warm feeling of accomplishment. He was doing this. He had saved the kitten, and now he was helping it recover. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every moment. However, as he continued watching the kitten, something unexpected happened. Maxim realized that he had lost one of the kitten's new medications. He had placed all the bottles on the table earlier, but now he couldn't find one of the tablets. It wasn't like him to misplace things, especially something as important as the kitten's medication. He searched the room frantically, lifting blankets, checking under the furniture, but there was no sign of it. Panic slowly crept into his chest. He knew how important it was to stick to the treatment regimen, how important it was for the kitten to stay on track with its recovery. What if the missing pill was the one that would make the biggest difference? What if the kitten's progress was delayed because of his mistake? Maxim's thoughts raced, but he quickly tried to calm himself down. He couldn't afford to let fear take over. He had to find that pill, and if he couldn't, he would figure something else out. But for the moment, he had to stay calm and stay focused on what was best for the kitten. With a sigh, Maxim continued his search, knowing that this was just another challenge in their long journey of recovery. The kitten needed him now more than ever, and he wasn't going to let it down. Chapter 8. Adjusting to new conditions. The kitten, now much stronger and more active, had gradually grown accustomed to its new home. It no longer cowered in the corners of the basement, but instead began exploring every nook and cranny of the house. Maxim watched with a sense of pride as the little creature took its time, sniffing around the rooms, curiously checking under furniture, and even leaping onto the windowsills. It was as if the kitten had finally realized that this place, this warm, cozy home, was its safe haven. Maxim could see the kitten becoming more confident each day. Its once fragile body was now growing stronger, and its playful antics were becoming more frequent. It would chase after little toy balls, bat at strings, and even pounce on random objects like a true little hunter. The changes were clear, and Maxim couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. All the time, effort, and love he had poured into the kitten's care had paid off. The kitten was thriving. He continued to care for it with the same dedication, ensuring that it was getting proper nutrition, keeping an eye on its health, and making sure it wasn't straining itself too much. There were still some moments when the kitten would sneeze or seem tired, but Maxim knew it was a part of the recovery process. As long as the kitten kept progressing, he was determined to stick with it. Maxim's family had also started to adjust to the presence of the kitten. His father, though initially hesitant, had begun to warm up to the idea of having the little animal around. He even helped Maxim build a small scratching post for the kitten, which was now one of its favorite spots. His mother, on the other hand, still harbored some concerns. She was worried about the extra work it took to care for the kitten and how it might affect the family's routine. But despite her reservations, she had begun to soften. She would occasionally pet the kitten when it came over to her, and she even started giving it treats, although she still kept a watchful eye on the little creature. Maxim appreciated how far his parents had come, even if they weren't completely at ease with the idea of a permanent pet just yet. He knew it would take time, and he was willing to be patient. After all, this kitten was his responsibility, and he was proud of how he had stepped up to the challenge. One sunny afternoon, as the days were growing warmer, Maxim decided to take the kitten outside for a short walk. It had been a while since he had let the kitten explore the yard, and he wanted to see how it would react to the outside world. He clipped a small harness onto the kitten, making sure it was secure, and gently led it outside. At first, the kitten hesitated, sniffing the air and stepping cautiously onto the grass. But before long, it was trotting around, exploring the backyard with its usual curiosity. Maxim smiled as he watched the kitten enjoy itself. It was a peaceful moment, the kind he had imagined when he first took the kitten in. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But as he relaxed, enjoying the sight of the kitten's playful behavior, he suddenly noticed that the little creature had wandered farther than usual. It was darting from one side of the yard to the other, clearly fascinated by something in the distance. Maxim called out to it, but the kitten didn't respond. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that the kitten was moving farther away from the house than he was comfortable with. "Come here, buddy," Maxim called again, his voice tinged with concern. But the kitten, with its playful instincts taking over, ignored him, venturing further into the overgrown part of the yard. Maxim followed, calling out, trying to coax it back. The kitten, now completely distracted by its exploration, didn't seem to hear him. Maxim quickened his pace, but just as he rounded a corner of the yard, the kitten vanished from his sight. He called out again, this time with more urgency, but there was no response. His pulse quickened as he scanned the yard, his heart racing. "Where are you?" he muttered under his breath. Maxim searched the area frantically, looking behind trees, under bushes, and around the shed, but there was no sign of the kitten. His mind raced with worry. Had it run off? Had something happened to it? It had never gone this far from the house before, and Maxim couldn't understand why it had wandered off so recklessly. He returned to the house, hoping to spot the kitten coming back on its own, but the yard was eerily quiet. His stomach churned with anxiety. Had something frightened it? Was it lost? The thought of the kitten, his little companion, out there alone in the vast, unfamiliar yard sent a wave of panic through him. Maxim sat on the porch, his eyes scanning the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of the kitten. Time seemed to slow down as he waited, his thoughts a mix of worry and frustration. He knew he had to stay calm, but the fear of something happening to the kitten gnawed at him. It had come so far, and now this? Was this really how their journey was going to end? Minutes felt like hours as Maxim waited, his heart pounding in his chest. Just as he was about to go back out and search the entire yard again, a small meow broke the silence. He looked up, and there, just around the corner of the house, was the kitten, looking at him with wide, curious eyes. Maxim let out a relieved breath, his shoulders sagging as the tension melted away. The kitten had simply wandered a bit farther than usual, but it had come back, as if it knew where it belonged. Maxim walked over to it, scooping it up into his arms and holding it close. "Don't scare me like that," he whispered, kissing the top of the kitten's head. The kitten purred softly, content and safe in Maxim's arms. Maxim felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had learned something important today. No matter how much he cared for the kitten, there would always be moments of uncertainty. But as long as they had each other, they would face whatever came their way. Chapter 9. The Final Decision. Maxim sat quietly in his room, the soft sound of the kitten purring in the background. His heart was heavy with a decision that had been weighing on him for weeks. The little creature, who had once been a helpless bundle of fur, had grown stronger and more playful with each passing day. Maxim couldn't imagine his life without the kitten. The thought of returning it to a shelter or letting it go was simply unbearable. He had grown attached to it, and the bond between them had become undeniable. Today, he decided, he would finally have the conversation with his parents about making the kitten a permanent part of their family. He had put it off for long enough, but now it was time. He needed to know where they stood on the matter. Maxim didn't want to keep the kitten hidden away in the basement, unsure of what would happen next. He wanted to give it a real home, a place where it could thrive and feel safe. As he sat at the kitchen table with his parents, the kitten curled up comfortably on his lap. Maxim took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "I want to keep the kitten. I've learned so much from taking care of him, and I think he's become a part of our family." His mother looked at him with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Maxim, you've done a great job with him, but you have to understand that having a pet is a big responsibility. It's not just about feeding it and playing with it. There's a lot of work involved." Maxim nodded, his eyes sincere. "I know, Mom. I've been feeding him, cleaning up after him, and making sure he's healthy. I know it's not always easy, but I've learned a lot. It's not just about having fun, it's about taking care of someone who depends on you." He paused, watching his mother's reaction carefully. "The kitten has really changed my life. He's made me more responsible, and he's taught me patience. I think I've grown up a lot because of him." His father, who had been silently listening, finally spoke. "I see how much you care for him, Maxim. And I can tell he's become important to you." He looked at the kitten, who was now stretching and playfully batting at Maxim's hand. "But I'm still not sure about this. We don't know how he'll behave long term, and we can't just keep him if it's not the right fit." Maxim felt a pang of doubt, but he didn't give up. "I understand, Dad. But I really believe he's found a home with us. He's already part of our family. Look at how much happier we've all been since he came here. He's brought so much joy, even when he was sick. And now he's healthy, and I can see he's getting used to being here." His mother sighed, clearly torn. "I'm not saying I don't see the changes, Maxim. I just want to be sure that this is something we can handle in the long run. I still have some reservations." Maxim lowered his gaze for a moment, then lifted his head, meeting his mother's eyes. "Please, just give it some more time. Let him settle in completely. If he's not the right fit, I'll take full responsibility for him, but I really think he deserves a chance." There was a long silence as his parents exchanged glances. Finally, his father spoke again. "All right, Maxim. We'll give him another month. If he behaves well, if he doesn't cause too much trouble, and if you keep up with your responsibilities, then we'll talk about making it permanent. But remember, this is a commitment. If things don't work out, we'll have to reconsider." Maxim's heart skipped a beat. He had been given a chance, a real chance to keep the kitten. Thank you so much," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with joy. "I promise, I'll take care of him." He'll be the best pet. His mother gave him a small, but affectionate smile. I hope you're right. Just remember that we're all in this together. Maxim beamed with pride as he looked down at the kitten, who had now curled up contentedly in his lap, purring softly. I'll prove to you that this was the right decision, he whispered to the kitten. We're going to make it work. Later that night, as Maxim lay in bed, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The weight of uncertainty had been lifted, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. After all, this little kitten had taught him so much already. With love, patience, and responsibility, they could build a life together. But as he drifted off to sleep, a small question lingered in the back of his mind. Would the kitten continue to thrive in their home? Or would there be obstacles he hadn't anticipated? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Maxim was willing to do whatever it took to make sure the kitten had a safe and loving home. Chapter 10. A new member of the family. The kitten had finally recovered. His once frail body had filled out, his eyes sparkled with energy, and his playful antics brought laughter to the house every day. No longer a weak, trembling creature, he had become a confident and curious kitten who had found his place in Maxim's home. The bond between them was undeniable, and it was clear to everyone that this was no longer just a temporary arrangement. The kitten was here to stay. Maxim felt a deep sense of pride as he watched his little friend grow stronger. Every day, he learned new things about his pet. He taught the kitten how to chase after a bowl, how to climb onto the windowsill to watch the birds outside, and even how to sit patiently for a treat. The bond they shared had blossomed into something much more than just a rescue. It was a partnership built on trust and care. He'd come so far from the days of uncertainty, when he didn't know if the kitten would survive, or whether his parents would agree to keep him. But now, the kitten had a home, and Maxim had done everything he could to ensure that the little creature would be happy and healthy. He'd learned patience, responsibility, and love, lessons that would stay with him forever. At first, it had been a struggle to convince his parents, but they too had softened over time. Maxim's father had come to appreciate the joy the kitten brought into the house, and his mother had started to get involved in the care, often offering to help with feeding or giving the kitten a bath when necessary. It wasn't just Maxim anymore. The entire family had come to embrace the kitten, each member finding their own way to bond with him. Even his mother, who had been the most hesitant at first, now took part in his care. It was clear that the kitten had wormed his way into everyone's hearts. The house had transformed in ways Maxim hadn't expected. It had become warmer, filled with the sound of purring, playful meows, and the rustling of the kitten's little paws as he darted through rooms. He had brought a new kind of energy into their home, and it felt like the family was whole in a way it never had been before. They had weathered through the challenges, the early doubts, the days of illness, and now, everything seemed perfect. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Maxim sat on the couch with the kitten in his lap. The golden light of the fading day filled the room, and Maxim couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of contentment. The little kitten, now confident and well-fed, lay curled up, purring softly as Maxim absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears. It was a peaceful moment, and as they both watched the sun dip below the horizon, Maxim realized that this was true happiness. Not the excitement of new toys or grand adventures, but the quiet moments of care, the steady presence of love, and the bond that had formed between him and the kitten. For Maxim, saving the kitten had been more than just an act of kindness. It had been his greatest achievement. It had taught him so much about life, responsibility, and love. He had started this journey to save a life, but in the process, his own life had changed forever. The lessons he had learned through the care of the kitten, the importance of patience, the value of responsibility, and the joy of unconditional love, were the most important things he would carry with him as he grew older. And as he sat there, with the kitten curled contentedly in his lap, Maxim knew that this was only the beginning of a beautiful journey. The kitten, once a fragile little thing that had needed saving, was now a vibrant, happy member of their family, and Maxim couldn't imagine life without him. As the sun finally set, casting the room in a soft twilight glow, Maxim smiled to himself. He had made a difference. He had saved a life, And in doing so, he had found something that would stay with him forever. A deep, unshakable bond of love and trust. The little kitten had become more than just a pet. He had become a part of Maxim's world, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest rewards come from acts of kindness, patience, and love. The world outside might change, seasons might shift, but Maxim knew that this moment, this little life he had saved, would always be with him. And together, they would face whatever the future held, side by side, with love and understanding. As the final rays of sunlight faded, Maxim leaned back, content in the knowledge that they had both found their place, together,